Unit 1. Race in American History. The topic of race is an important part of history. It is not only a part of our past, but also part of our present. The idea of race and racial divide in the United States began when Europeans arrived at the North American continent. Before the concept of slavery started, many African Americans were indentured servants. It was not until there was an uprise in demand for product that servitude soon turned to slavery, which would encompass many years of American history. Roderick A. Ferguson's discussion on race is one of freedom and power, the freedom of the whites to enslave, and the power they held as a dominant race to do so. This idea is supported by Walter Johnson's essay, Slavery, which states, "Over the 4 centuries of Atlantic slavery, millions of Africans and their descendants were turned into prophets, fancies, sensations, and possessions of New World whites. African Americans were taken advantage of and turned into slaves based on their race." It is impossible to give accurate figures, but some historians have estimated that 6 to 7 million slaves were imported to the New World during the 18th century. Slaves were mistreated, not afforded rights, and brutalized in many cases for no reason. In Alexander Falconbridge's primary account of the slave trade, he recalls his experiences on slave ships and the deplorable conditions endured. He discusses the comparison of breeding cattle to breeding of Negroes and how there was a dependence on procreation. This was the mindset of many slave owners and traders. Many slaves would die en route due to disease or because of brutal beatings. The narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass helps us to expand our views and discussion on race in American history. He describes an account where he was moved to Baltimore. The mistress was a first-time slave owner and did not know the inhumanity to which slaves were to be treated. She was a genuinely kind woman who treated him well, not like his former owners. She teaches Douglass the alphabet and how to spell, but shortly after, her husband finds out and forbids her from further teaching. It is after this encounter that the manner in which he was treated changed. He states slavery soon proved its ability to divest her of these heavenly qualities. Under its influence, the tender heart became stone. Over time, it had been taught and ingrained in her that African Americans and slaves were not to be treated like whites. In reference to race, it is apparent that we are not born to know the differences, but we are taught it. We are shown to hate, to stereotype, as Douglass's first-hand account discusses. Although slavery was abolished in 1865 at the end of the Civil War, racial tensions would remain. Due to the preceding years in history of African Americans being considered the lowest class, the idea of their now freedom scared and angered many. The digital history text states, "The American South adopted a 2-category system of racial categorization in which any person with a black mother was automatically considered to be black. This thinking continued all the way into the 1950s and 60s, where there was racial segregation, especially in the southern states. There were laws made where African Americans could not use the same facilities as whites or could not hold governmental positions. Civil rights pioneers, including Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., fought hard toward equal rights. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 helped to advance equal rights by prohibiting discrimination. There continued to be outrage by whites, but there was now some accountability. Our digital history text also states that the Justice Department brought legal suits against those charged with racial discrimination. Fast forwarding 50 or so years to 2017, slavery does not exist. However, the discussion of race and racism continues to be an almost weekly topic of discussion in the news and media. We can see over the course of American history, it appears that the idea of race is built on power and superiority. We have developed and progressed as a country in many ways by abolishing slavery, creating equal rights for all, and allowing freedoms to protest inequalities. Ideas on race have changed over time in the U.S. based on social and political pressures. Race is and will continue to be a sensitive and hot-button topic as each individual has their personal views. There needs to be continued discussion and education, and we should use the mistakes of the past to guide our country forward.